Do you know any shepherds? No hands, guess not. I don't either, but the closest I've come is fairly close. When I was stationed in a semi-rural parish in Medina County, I came to know a woman of our parish who lived in Ashland, and her job is she trains dogs to herd sheep. Not that there is a great need for such dogs in northeastern Ohio. We don't have any big flocks of sheep that I know of. But to my surprise, there is a market for competitive dog shepherding. Anybody here have a shepherd dog that competes in such events? Well, it exists. And my friend Judy owns a flock of sheep, so she can use it for training these dogs. There is not a crying need in the United States for shepherds. In China and Australia, maybe there is, because they're the biggest sheep countries in the world, but not in the United States. Does anybody here know a kid who wants to be a shepherd? Ryan? No? Didn't think so. Sebastian? No? Hannah? Danny? No? Well, Ryan wanted to be a baseball umpire. I think Sebastian's going to go into the Army. I met a girl who wants to be a veterinarian. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an airplane pilot. Being a shepherd never occurred to me. But our readings from Jeremiah, the 23rd Psalm, and the Gospel of Mark make very clear that we cannot do without shepherds. When we understand them, that is, from a scriptural perspective. Sheep were very important in ancient Israel, and perhaps they still are today. So important that the king of Israel was characterized as a shepherd for his people. Sadly, many of those kings proved to be very bad shepherds, which is why in today's reading from Jeremiah, we hear the prophet giving such a scathing report on the current king, the last king of Israel. Zedekiah was his name. Zedekiah and many of his predecessors would suffer severe punishment, the prophet said, because they shepherded themselves, not the sheep. The people of Israel for whom they were responsible were scattered like a sheep herd attacked by wolves. Psalm 23, which was our psalm in response to our first reading today, in that we see that God depicts himself as a shepherd. And we know that in the Gospel of John, Jesus speaks of himself as the Good Shepherd. But the flock that Jesus shepherded and that God shepherds often consists of very unintelligent members. Well, sheep themselves are rather dumb. If they're not driven by the shepherd, they'll just sit down in the field where they're easy pickings for wolves. They can't find their own pasture, and they can't find their own water. They need a shepherd or they're lost. It's an unfortunate truth that we human beings often get lost, rather like sheep that wander away from the flock. We do things that are harmful to ourselves, and that's why we need a shepherd to guide us. For that reason, God's Son emptied himself and took on our humanity. He saw our need as Jesus sees the vast crowd's need in our gospel passage. He taught them, we're told, and as we'll see next Sunday, he fed them by multiplying the loaves and the fish. In what way do you need a shepherd? Because, my friends, all of us do. How easily we become spiritually lost. It can happen through bitterness. A fellow called Jack desperately needed a shepherd at one point in his life because of a terrible betrayal that shook him to his core and mired him in bitterness, a bitterness he could not shake. He could not forgive until he allowed the good shepherd to lead him. I find that story so familiar, how it applies to my life. I wonder how I would handle the heavy burdens some people have to shoulder, people I've met, and maybe you have too, such as a woman whose repeated bouts of cancer, the death of her husband, and worst of all, the drug addiction of both of her children led her to a very dark place spiritually. And sometimes I wonder, what was the story behind the life of that criminal crucified with Jesus who repented? He must have led a desperate life to have warranted crucifixion, normally something reserved for people who commit capital crimes. The path he chose took him far from God. But before he died, as the Gospel of Luke says, God gave him a shepherd in the person of Jesus, and he followed that shepherd to heaven. Jesus shepherds all of us as he did the crowd that sought him out in that deserted spot where he and the apostles beached their boat. He also calls on you and me and all of us Christians to be shepherds in the sense that we who recognize Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life are to encourage others to join us in following Jesus. Jesus, our shepherd, shows us the way, and in Scripture and Eucharist nourishes us so we have strength on our journey to heavenly life. Brothers and sisters, blessed in this way, let us bless those we will encounter in the week ahead by acting as a shepherd for them.